May 1945. Berlin was burning. The Third Reich lay in ruins. Hitler's corpse was cooling in a bunker beneath the shattered city. After 6 years of blood and fire, after 50 million dead, the war in Europe was finally over. The world exhaled. Along the Elbe River, American soldiers and Russian soldiers were embracing like brothers. They were sharing cigarettes, passing bottles of vodka and whiskey back and forth, dancing to accordion music in the rubble. Photographers captured the moment for history. Politicians in Washington and London were already drafting speeches about eternal friendship between East and West. But standing apart from the celebration, watching the scene with the cold eyes of a predator, was one man who refused to smile. General George S. Patton Jr. While everyone else saw the end of a war, Patton saw the beginning of the next one. While his fellow generals toasted to peace, Patton was already counting the Russian tanks rolling west. While the politicians celebrated their Soviet allies, Patton whispered words that would haunt the next half-century: "We have defeated the wrong enemy." And nowhere would this tension explode more dramatically than at a victory banquet where a Russian general would offer Patton a toast of friendship, and Patton would respond with an insult so savage, so shocking, that the translator would be too terrified to speak. An insult that brought the room to a standstill. An insult that revealed the brutal truth everyone else was afraid to acknowledge. This is the story of that moment. The moment one American general predicted the Cold War before it had a name. The moment diplomacy died and raw honesty stood naked in its place. But to understand what Patton said, you first need to understand who Patton was. George Patton wasn't just a general. He was a warrior from another age, a man who believed he had fought in past lives, who claimed to remember dying on ancient battlefields. He wore ivory-handled pistols on his hips like a gunfighter. He slapped shell-shocked soldiers and called them cowards. He believed in reincarnation, destiny, and the glory of combat. His men called him Old Blood and Guts because he never asked them to go anywhere he wouldn't lead. They loved him. They feared him. They would follow him into hell. And in 1945, Patton had just led the most devastating military force in human history across Europe. His Third Army had torn through France, Belgium, and Germany like a hurricane of steel. They had liberated more territory, captured more prisoners, and killed more enemy soldiers than any army in the war. Patton didn't just win battles. He annihilated opponents. He moved so fast that German commanders surrendered simply because they couldn't keep track of where he was. But now, with victory in sight, with Berlin just days away, Eisenhower had ordered him to stop. Halt, the order read. Let the Russians take Berlin. Patton had stared at that order like it was written in a foreign language. Let the Russians take Berlin? Let the communists claim the ultimate prize? He had thrown the paper across the room in rage. His staff officers had never seen him so furious. "We're handing Europe to the Reds on a silver platter," Patton had shouted, his face purple with anger. "I could be in Berlin in 48 hours. 48 hours. And Ike wants me to sit here and watch the Russians waltz in?" But orders were orders. The Third Army stopped. And Patton watched, seething, as Soviet tanks rolled into the German capital. He watched as the hammer and sickle rose over the Reichstag. He watched as Stalin's armies didn't just liberate Eastern Europe, they occupied it. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania. Everywhere the Red Army went, they stayed. The iron gates were already slamming shut. Patton saw it all. And unlike the politicians who wanted to believe in lasting peace, unlike the diplomats who convinced themselves that Stalin could be reasoned with, Patton knew exactly what was happening. The Russians, he wrote in his diary, his handwriting sharp and angry, are not our allies. They are Mongols. Barbarians. They have no regard for human life, no honor, no decency. Mark my words, we will be at war with them within 10 years. And we're giving them half of Europe to prepare. His aides tried to calm him down. "General, we can't fight another war. The men are exhausted. The American people want peace." Patton's response was ice cold: "The American people are fools if they think this is peace. This is just an intermission." Then came the invitation. The Soviet command wanted to host a celebration with the American generals. A gesture of friendship. A symbol of unity. It would be held near Linz, Austria, in a commandeered mansion filled with looted treasures. Marshal Fyodor Talbukin, hero of the Soviet Union and commander of the 3rd Ukrainian Front, would host. When Patton received the invitation, he didn't see it as an honor. He saw it as reconnaissance. "I'm not going there to drink," he told his aides. "I'm going to look the enemy in the eye." The day of the meeting arrived. The Soviets had organized a massive military parade to impress their American guests. Thousands of Red Army soldiers marched in formation. T-34 tanks rumbled past, their treads chewing up the cobblestones. Artillery pieces rolled by, still caked with mud from the front lines. Cossack cavalry thundered past on horseback, their sabers flashing in the sunlight. It was a show of force. A message: we are strong. We are victorious. Do not forget it. Patton stood on the reviewing platform, ramrod straight in his uniform, watching every detail with the eyes of a professional killer. He studied their equipment, their discipline, their faces. When the parade finally ended and the dust settled, an aide asked him what he thought. Patton's response was brutal. "They're the sorriest bunch of sons of bitches I've ever seen. No uniform standards. No march discipline. They look like a mob with guns." The aide shifted nervously. "But General, they did fight all the way from Stalingrad." "I know what they did," Patton cut him off, his voice hard. "And that's what worries me. They're tough bastards. Brutal. And if we let them think we're weak, they'll roll right over us." He paused, his jaw clenching. "I could beat them. But I need to do it now, before they dig in." The aide swallowed. Nobody spoke for a long moment. After the parade came the banquet. The Russians had prepared a feast that would have impressed Caesar himself. The table groaned under the weight of caviar, smoked sturgeon, roasted meats, and pyramids of fresh bread. And vodka. Rivers of it. Crystal decanters filled with the clear, burning liquid that Russians drank like water. In Russian culture, toasts were sacred. You didn't just drink, you honored. You toasted Stalin, you toasted Roosevelt, you toasted the motherland, the army, the fallen, the future. And with every toast, you drained your glass in one gulp. Refusing to drink was worse than an insult. It was a declaration of contempt. Patton hated vodka. He was a bourbon man. But he understood the game, and for the first hour, he played along. He raised his glass when required. He drank when ordered. His face remained carved from granite, revealing nothing. But beneath the surface, the tension was suffocating. The Russian generals smiled with their mouths, but their eyes were calculating, cold. They knew Patton hated them. Patton knew they hated him. They were predators at a dinner table, watching each other for signs of weakness, waiting for the first one to show teeth. Then came the moment that would become legend. A high-ranking Russian general, some accounts say it was Zhukov himself, others say it was a corps commander whose name has been lost to history, stood up. The room fell silent. He raised his glass. High, the crystal catching the candlelight. Through an interpreter, he spoke. To the eternal friendship between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. To the solidarity of our great nations. To the brotherhood forged in the fires of war. Every eye in the room turned to Patton. The Russian general was looking directly at him, glass extended, waiting. It was a test. A challenge wrapped in diplomatic language. Patton stood slowly. He didn't reach for his glass. The interpreter, sensing danger, spoke nervously. "General Patton, the marshal offers you a toast." "I heard him," Patton said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The silence deepened. You could hear the candles flickering. Patton looked at the Russian general. His face was stone. His eyes were blue fire. When he spoke, every word was deliberate, measured, chosen for maximum impact. "I will not drink with you." The interpreter's face went white. "General, I don't think I said," Patton continued, his voice louder now, carrying to every corner of the room, "I will not drink with you or any other Russian son of a bitch." The room gasped. One of the American colonels actually dropped his fork. Another closed his eyes, certain they were about to witness the start of World War III. The Russian officers half rose from their seats, hands moving toward sidearms. The interpreter was shaking. He turned to Patton, his voice barely a whisper. "General, please. I cannot translate that. It will cause an international incident. It could mean war." Patton leaned forward, his face inches from the interpreter's. His voice dropped to a growl, but every syllable carried the weight of command. "You tell him. Word for word. Exactly what I said. That's an order." The interpreter looked like a man facing a firing squad. He turned slowly to the Russian general. In halting Russian, his voice trembling, he translated. "General Patton says, he will not drink with you, because you are a son of a bitch." The Americans held their breath. This was it. This was how the peace would shatter. One American general's pride would ignite the Cold War hot, right here, right now. The Russian general stared at Patton. His face was unreadable. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. And then, impossibly, the Russian general began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his chest, then burst out like thunder. He slapped the table with his palm, making the glasses jump. He looked at Patton with something that might have been respect, might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. Through the interpreter, still laughing, the Russian general replied, "Tell General Patton that I think he is a son of a bitch too." Patton listened to the translation. For the first time that evening, a small, cold smile appeared on his lips. He picked up his glass. He nodded once. "All right," he said. "Now that we understand each other, I'll drink to that." They raised their glasses, two warriors, two killers, two men who understood each other better than any diplomat ever could. They drank. One son of a bitch to another. The room exhaled. The tension broke like a fever. Within minutes, the generals were toasting again, the vodka flowing. The moment passing into legend. But Patton wasn't done. In the weeks that followed, he became more vocal, more insistent, more desperate to make people see what he saw. He started advocating for something that sounded like madness: rearm the surrendered German Wehrmacht, combine them with the Third Army, and drive the Red Army back to Moscow. "We're going to fight them eventually," he told anyone who would listen. "Why not do it now, while our army is intact and we know we can win? Every day we wait, they get stronger. Every day, Stalin tightens his grip on Europe." He wrote to his wife, "The Russians are worse than the Nazis. At least the Nazis believed in something, however twisted. The Soviets believe only in power." Eisenhower was horrified. "George, for God's sake, shut up. The Russians are our allies. We just won a war together." Patton shook his head. "Ike, you're wrong. And I hate that I'm right. But mark my words, if we don't stop them now, we'll be fighting them for the next 50 years. And millions more will die." He was right, of course. The Korean War. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Vietnam. Afghanistan. Proxy wars across the globe. The Cold War would last exactly as long as Patton predicted, and the body count would dwarf his worst estimates. But in 1945, nobody wanted to hear it. The press turned on him. Politicians called him a warmonger. Even his fellow generals distanced themselves. Patton had become dangerous not to the Russians, but to the comfortable lie everyone wanted to believe. In October 1945, Eisenhower relieved him of command. They took away the Third Army, the men he loved, the force he had built into a legend. They gave him a desk job pushing papers in Bavaria. It broke something in Patton. He wrote, "They have taken away my soul." 2 months later, in December 1945, his neck was broken in a car accident that nobody could quite explain. He died 12 days later, paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, while the Iron Curtain fell across Europe exactly as he had predicted. The toast became a legend. Soldiers told the story around campfires, embellishing it with each retelling. "Did you hear what Old Blood and Guts called the Ruskies?" But it was never a joke to Patton. It was the truth, delivered without diplomacy or mercy. Today, historians still argue about that moment. Was Patton right? If the Allies had listened, if they had confronted Stalin in 1945 when the American army was at full strength and the Soviet Union was exhausted, could the Cold War have been avoided? We'll never know. History doesn't offer do-overs. But that toast, that moment of brutal honesty in a room full of lies, reveals everything about George S. Patton. He didn't do diplomacy. He didn't do political correctness. He saw the world as it was: friends and enemies, warriors and cowards, truth and lies. And when a Russian general tried to pretend they were friends, Patton refused to play along. He looked him in the eye and told him exactly what he was. In a world of politicians and spies, Patton was a warrior. And warriors don't drink with the enemy, even at victory parties. If you believe history needs more uncomfortable truths like this, hit the like button. If you want more stories about the generals who refuse to play politics, subscribe to this channel. Because we're just getting started.